As the Trump administration continues to stonewall investigations, a growing number of Democrats are pushing for impeachment.
I believe that we have come to the time of impeachment. I think that at a certain point, this is no longer about politics, but this is about upholding the rule of law.
Over 30 of the president's associates were indicted by the Mueller probe. His campaign chairman is in prison right now. Don't tell me there's not enough to discuss and debate impeachment.
Yes, if there was an impeachment inquiry, I would support it.
The President of the United States of America needs to be impeached.
Where do we end up if we do that? That's the question. And I'm still mulling it over. I'm going to talk to my colleagues when I get on the floor in a few minutes. But I'm getting there.
Wow. The mounting pressure to impeach is underscoring divisions within the Democratic Party. According to the New York Times, and a sign that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi senses her caucus is growing restless, she's called a Wednesday morning meeting to update lawmakers on the status and the strategy behind the House's investigation. So that'll happen today. People involved in the investigations tell the Times that Speaker Pelosi has also approved an escalation of tactics, short of impeachment, to try and turn the tables. So, Jake Sherman, I guess I ask you what Elijah asked in his soundbite, which is, where do we go from there if we get there? And that's probably what Nancy Pelosi is considering as well. Obviously, this would make much more sense if there were Republicans on board, more than Justin Amash.
Yeah, and if there were Republicans, there's not one Republican in the Senate who's interested in impeachment and who has even shown any openness to impeachment. So that's another reality. At the top of Playbook this morning, we kind of lay out Pelosi's strategy, which is to really highlight all of the documents that she is in court trying to get, all of the steps she's taken. She's concerned, and her allies are concerned, the people that work for her are concerned, that a quick impeachment right now would undermine their ability to get documents. Remember, impeachment isn't just a magical key that will open a box of documents that are otherwise unavailable to Congress. I mean, impeachment is just another step forward, and it's going to continue this fight. Now, they believe that there's just 25 Democrats who have publicly said they should impeach the president. That's still like 10% of the Democratic caucus. So this isn't widespread right now. And yes, some of her leadership have come out saying they want to impeach the president, but still Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, and the top leaders are still all in unison that they don't want to do this at this point. Her allies believe, and again, take this with a grain of salt, take it with whatever you want, that if Democrats impeach the president, they're going to lose the House in 2020 and they're going to lose the White House in 2020. That's what they believe, I think.
Yeah. That's the issue, Willie. I mean, the minute they start impeachment proceedings, can you see President Trump, what he will do on the national stage with that in front of rallies? I mean, he will make this his chaos roadshow. Well, and that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a long time, that although the facts may lead Democrats to impeachment, it's a fight that Donald Trump and the White House would love to have, because, remember, it's a dead end in the Republican-controlled Senate where he would not be convicted. Obviously, we've seen how Republicans have fallen in line behind President Trump. Jake, you anticipated my question to you, which is really that it's still a pretty small minority of Democrats who are supporting impeachment. You said it, 25, something like 24 of them who've come out publicly. You've had Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, others in leadership positions saying, let's pump the brakes a little bit on this question. Are they considering the idea that impeachment, although, again, the facts may warrant that inquiry, is a good thing potentially for Donald Trump to use out on the campaign trail and perhaps to get reelected on?
What we'd like to say is, what would they say if we put him on truth serum? And I think if you put Nancy Pelosi on an imagined truth serum, which obviously we don't have, she would say that, yes, the president is going to use this on the campaign trail, is going to wallop Democrats with it. And what he's going to say is this: Democrats got elected, and all they did was rehash old investigations, gone after my business. He's already going to do this, by the way. Impeachment is not the only thing that's going to make him do this, but he's going to say, they went after my business records from 2010. They just wanted to harass me, and Democrats are worried about that. Now, listen, it's not as if they aren't investigating him. They are in court getting documents, and by the way, they just secured a crucial victory days ago to get his accounting firm to turn over business records. So it's not as if they're sitting on their hands, but they do think that just a couple months into this majority, 4 or 5 months into this majority, that it would be a step too far. Now, I will say this, the angst is absolutely growing, and as an observer of Congress who's been doing this for a decade, I don't know. I'm not saying she can't, but I don't know how she holds this position for the next 18 months.
Yeah.
I mean, this Congress is far from over, and there is a growing group of people, although not a majority or even close, that want to take that step.
Okay, so Bob Bauer, I'll end with you. Take it where you want to go in terms of what happens next. What is the most significant move that we could see coming? Will we see the tax returns?
Eventually, yes. Under what circumstances, on what timetable, that's very difficult to say because the administration appears to be dug in. On the question of impeachment, Speaker Pelosi has referred to other tactics to escalate. The House does have other vehicles by which they can put pressure on the executive branch through the appropriations and a variety of other processes. They can throw a lot of sand into the administrative gears. There is also some talk about their using their inherent contempt power to assess fines, not necessarily, though they may have the authority to do that, to detain recalcitrant witnesses, but to assess fines. It isn't clear to me that they will resort to that, but they may threaten it and try to put pressure on witnesses that are so far unwilling to defy the president's directive that they not testify, like Don McGahn. So we may see a range of potential responses or the threat of those responses as part of the escalation that the speaker has referred to. I'd say only one other point about an impeachment inquiry. An impeachment inquiry, I do think, whatever one believes about the merits of it, strengthens Congress's hand in a court battle over the obtaining of some parts of the information that is looking for here. It is really at the apex of Congress's constitutional authority that it relates a demand for information to the exercise of its impeachment authority. So that is an important step in the constitutional sense, as well as whatever it may reflect about member impatience with the Trump administration.
Well, just real quickly, are you saying if impeachment proceedings begin, Congress will have more power to actually access information in this inquiry?
It strengthens their constitutional position. One of the fights they're having with the administration is whether they have a legitimate purpose in seeking certain information. At the moment that they are formally inquiring into the grounds of impeachment, that legitimate need intensifies significantly. It's raised to a different and more compelling level in any subsequent judicial contest.
Wow, a lot to consider. Bob Bauer, thank you so much for being on this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to run through some of the new polling today, including suggestions that the president is trailing Joe Biden in some of the key states. And speaking of the former VP, new numbers show him dropping a few points as Bernie Sanders gains ground. We'll get to all of that ahead, but
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.